So, welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. I'm delighted to have my two guests here with me today, one of which you will recognise as a returning face. We'll go ladies first, Rhianydd Williams from the TUC, and we've also got Darren Dupre from Unison. But let me introduce them a little bit more to you. We had such a great response to the previous episode that we had about British Standard 30416. At the end of that call, Darren had said to me, we absolutely must get one of the founding people involved, and that is Rhianydd Williams. So true to his word, he's made it happen. So that's absolutely brilliant. But let me tell you a little bit more. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to look at really about beyond policies, what is the relationship with trade unions and the topic of menopause. From my point of view, weekly, I hear that too many organisations just say we don't have the budget for that, which drives me insane, I must say. It's seen as a women's issue, but then trade unions historically may be seen as that's when the issue's gone wrong type thing. But we know there's a much bigger bridge between those two things, trade unions and menopause. So I'm delighted to have Rhianydd Williams, Equality Policy Officer at the Trade Union Congress. Rhianydd has been instrumental and truly instrumental, because if you look at this beautiful document, you will actually see on the back, she is actually one of the people who has actually written this. This was handed to me nearly a year ago by a very proud manager who said, you've got to read this document. It's absolutely brilliant. But what Rhianydd has managed to do is make menopause a core part of national conversations, not just regional conversations, but national conversations around workplace health, equity and dignity. She supports trade unions in shaping meaningful conversations. She's got a great friend and buddy in Darren. They obviously have a great relationship. And it's about elevating the conversation at every level, but not just conversation, actually turning things into action. So welcome, Rhianydd. Lovely to have you.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really delighted to come. I feel like a very esteemed guest because I've seen your previous podcasts and I know how well you do, this work. So thank you very much.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Oh, I shall take that. Little old me with my little old podcast. It really was something that just was set up to help people, and I'm so glad that people do feel that. And Darren Dupre, no stranger to our podcast here, regional organizer and head of local government at Unison, is a returning guest. Darren continues to push for bold, inclusive action across public and private sectors. The work you do is phenomenal, Darren. You're too humble by half. So Rhianydd and I will big you up on your behalf.
Yeah.
His advocacy has helped shape so many actions, not just in Wales, but again, nationally. The introduction of BS 30416, you have absolutely made it your work to ensure that workers in unionised sectors and beyond actually never suffer in silence. You continue to champion for that, and for that we're really, really grateful. So today we're going to actually get into some questions. We're going to sort of see what we can do to bridge this gap. So if I set the frame, which is basically we've got a lot of organisations still not doing anything, and it's not very long now before the employment bill is going to be on our doorsteps.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to be doing something, especially if you're one of those organisations with 250 plus employees. It's not going to be a case of nice to do. You are going to have to do this. So let's get into this. And I don't mind who goes first. You can fight it out between you. How do we move beyond this idea that menopause is just a women's issue over here, or it suddenly becomes a union issue? How do we move beyond that? What do organisations rely on? When they think about unions, do they just have them pigeonholed in one sort of vista? That's what our trade unions do. Is it all about strikes? Is it all about the them and us type culture, or has it become more progressive and about something else? And how can we actually share this responsibility across business? So over to you. What do you think? Menopause, women's issue, union issue, or something else?
I'll come into that first, because the first thing to say about that is that actually unions are a majority of women. If you look at our kind of population as a trade union movement, we have more women than men in our movement.
Wow.
Actually, we have a higher than general population number of Black, Asian, and ethnic minority people as well. So, workers are their unions. We're not these kind of people sitting in ivory towers and saying, you must do this, you must do that. We are our unions. And so, this was something when we started working on this all those years ago. This was something that we didn't just kind of think, oh, we should work on this. It was something that we were already hearing about. Our workers were telling us that this was coming up. Women in particular were going through it, bad experiences, and then finding that they were going through disciplinary issues, and they didn't know where to go to. And we felt like reps weren't, kind of knowledgeable on this issue to be able to represent properly. And there was a big kind of problem in workplaces that, managers didn't know what to do. We started calling it the M word, because people would say, if they were brave enough, they would say, oh, I'm going through the menopause, and then their manager would not know what to do and not give them any support. So we needed to create this kind of good relationship between workers and the workplaces about what kind of support can be there in place, what kind of things can you do constructively, how can you build help, and how can you build a network. So, this idea that unions are over here and women are over there, actually we're all in the same place here. And, that's why it's important for us to make sure that we're working on this and continue to kind of grow on this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Darren, I'm going to bring you in on this because this has not been a recent journey. When we think about the original trailblazers and the original, what I call those grassroots supporters, the people that have had that vision. Rhianydd is one of them. I mean, she talked offline a little bit there about it's a 10-year journey, a 10-year plus journey. I mean, from your perspective, when you think about, obviously we've got the toolkit here. I mean, what has it meant to you? Because actually, I think there's quite a nice relationship that you can share with us about how you actually have come together.
Well, I do, and I come through this as ever with zero ego or anything like that. But some people have said some nice and kind things to me along the way, which is absolutely right. But um, this is a matter of fact, not a matter of emotion. No Rhianydd, no Darren in this place. It's absolutely as simple and binary as that. So the stuff that I've managed to do has been walking with a baton that Rhianydd sort of like created with the toolkit, which we've sort of like discussed before. As I said, that toolkit, which was launched in our Senedd, the Parliament of Wales in 2017, just lit a fire, and I guess in so many ways that because we in Wales we have traditionally had a slightly different way of doing industrial relations. I've only been working or been a rep within trade unions for my 32nd year now, and I've never organised a strike once. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in terms of my career prospects, but we generally have a more a way of dealing with industrial relations around social partnership and how can we engage with employees at various levels to improve things rather than, naturally just going for the worst case scenario, which is like a ballot and a threat and stuff like that. It's not really our tradition. So when the toolkit challenged trade unionists and employees as well to go and do something about this, rather than it just being a book or a really, really nice a nice document, and it is a nice document, but actually challenge us to go and do something about it. And that was exactly why I then went to Flinders University NHS Trust and said, and very much like Rhianydd was saying, Unison has got 75% of its membership, that's over 1 million members, are women, and that's why this is so important for us. And then I looked at the demographics of Flinders University NHS Trust in 2018, and 75% of staff were women, and 61% of staff were women between the ages of 45 and 60. And it just sort of like, when I was able to have that conversation, to take my toolkit, a little bit worried that a male regional organizer was coming in to say, is this something that we can do in partnership? But you saw the demographics and that actually this is something that Unison's passionate about. And it was an emotional yes, we would like to do something with you. sort of like pretty much straight away, and that's pretty much where the journey went. Where at the time Velindre was, so I'm sure it is now, seen as the most menopause-aware employer in Wales. Now, it's very, very nice that Darren gets mentions in dispatches, but I'm just so super pleased and super proud that Rhianydd is on here, and you showed, the World's Her Toolkit, because without that, there would have probably been less likelihood of activity, because I was completely brand new to this sort of like space. But everything I've learned from that toolkit has now driven me all the way into helping to write that British standard. And that's, that is not, that wasn't a negotiation with trade unions and employers banging heads. That was a huge collaboration, as you know, with lots of employers, lots of intersectional groups, trade unions, sort of like and others, who have brought a world-class standard, which is, downloaded now in 170 countries and over 30,000 times.
Yeah, it's just it's phenomenal, and like all good stories, there's usually a really good beginning, a cracking middle, and a great end. And so I'm absolutely confident that this will continue. I mean, what I particularly like, let me see if I can actually flip it. Yeah, I look first time. There we go. The whole mapping activities, I
Yeah.
absolutely love that idea. Can you share with us a little bit, Rhianydd? I mean, that, because I think that is really like revolutionary in terms of opening up conversations for people that actually, if you don't want to say something, but you could have put something on one of these. Could you explain to people what that mapping activity actually is?
Yeah, well, so Sarah Rees, who I co-wrote this toolkit with, she was working with One Wales at the time, and I were having lots of conversations about, what are the ways that we can deal with this in the workplace? What kind of levers can we use? Can we use the Equality Act? Can we use the Health and Safety Act? And under the Equality Act, we found some really good levers, particularly around disability. But the strongest piece of legislation that we had available to our disposal at the time was the Health and Safety Act. And how do we bring this into a health and safety issue? Lots of people still to this day look at health and safety and they think it's hard hats and steel toe boots. And actually, women, we deserve safety in the workplace. And, we have a different makeup. We're not small men. We have a different kind of structure. We metabolize, drugs in different ways. We have a different skeletal structure. And we thought that it was really important that we recognize this. And so with the toolkit, and I bring my colleague Jo Rees into this as well, because she did a lot of the design of this toolkit. We thought that mapping would be one way to go on this, because we need to recognize that our bodies need to be protected. And so, we need to know about gender sensitive risk assessments. What kind of risks are there? How are you preventing those risks from happening to workers in the workplace? And we wanted to do something that was really empowering for both employers and for workers, so that you can be on the same page on this, so that you can say to your employer, I think you need to be doing this. And an employer can go in and say, actually, yeah, I can, this is something I can work on. We've been in so many of these kind of conversations with employers over the years on various topics, and they like to do something that's constructive. So, those kind of mapping exercises or those, assessments, they are something that's really constructive, and people want to be able to be given something that they can go away and do and feel prepared for this, for this piece of work. So yeah, that's where that came from. And we knew that, we'd have to kind of break new ground. We had lots of health and safety conferences where we'd invite health and safety reps into, and the demographic there was largely men. Even though we know that women's health is an important issue, largely men were taking on the role of health and safety officers. So we had some internal work to do there around kind of changing that demographic. And we've got to prepare for the future as well. How do we bring women reps into that health and safety rep role? How do we bring younger workers into that rep role as well? And how do we make sure that we're kind of continuing to build a future where health is inclusive, and we're seeing that through the development of our work on AI in health as well. And you can see kind of when women's health has been so under-researched, the menopause has been so under-researched, so poorly kind of prepared for, when we started this work, that doctors were only getting a mandatory half-a-day training on this. Well, where do we kind of go from there? So, we had those conversations with politicians about kind of increasing the amount of training that doctors got, but then we looked in-house as well, and we thought, well, we are a body of people here that can persuade employers to look at health and safety, and here are the tools to do it.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And what I really liked about it was actually, how people experience ill health at work. I've just been doing a little bit of research myself. The World Economic Forum, I mean, this just is staggering. It's a good job I'm sat down. That women will spend up to 25% of their lives in ill health across the globe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unthinkable. And yet, actually, if we invested just £1, we'd get £3 back in terms of productivity and output. But actually, by just doing the addressing of this health need, women stand to have that disability life adjusted years reduced down to just 8%. By just talking about it. I'm sure you would agree, we probably all know women who are very robust because we have to be, we have to be resilient because we have to be, but actually it's really hard, it's really difficult, and these are for organisations that actually are willing to have the conversations. What about the small organisations, the 99% of the UK businesses that don't have 250 members of staff, so what I really like about this is also it's translatable. There's nothing to stop a shop owner downloading some of these stuff and going, hang on a minute, I need to ask some questions here, because the toilet out the back you couldn't get a single child in there, let alone a grown adult with a bag who's trying to change a menstrual pad. I was speaking to actually Jean Hewitt, who helped write the British Standard as well. I'm picking you off one by one, Darren. It's brilliant. And I spoke to her yesterday. We're gonna do a recording because she talks about the build quality, Rhianydd. So actually, if your toilets don't have a sink in them, there's a whole issue around dignity for people. The fact that is so laborious and horrible to navigate if you're someone who is having a menstrual flood, whereas something like pads on a roll stuck inside the cubicle, even if there isn't a sink in there, I mean, that's the next thing. But I think there's so much here that I think you were already thinking about. But I guess if we were to sort of, maybe for the people watching this, who'll be watching this, they'll probably be thinking, okay, get that, I've understood. We need to be doing something, even though it's not mandated right at this minute. It's coming, and we're going to have to provide data on it, so we need to be doing something. So what actually constitutes a good framework? And by that, I mean a good framework that supports people going through menopause and in terms of menstrual health in the workplace. Are there essential ingredients from both of your perspectives that turn, what we can sort of frame good intentions into actually long-term change? Because if there's one thing that really irritates me, it's this tick boxing, we did an awareness, done. So how can we create or adopt these frameworks in a way that means, yes, we're doing it, we're bringing people on this journey? What are your key ingredients, would you say, for a good framework, or how to approach it?
Well, I really like what you were just saying there, about an investment in health, because it's really important. And, for us, looking at class is really important in this as well. Because if you look at women who are undervalued, underpaid, it's often working class women. And in our campaign, toilets came up over and over and over again. And I went to a menopause day one day, and it was big bosses who were rightfully really proud of the work that they did, and on menopause, and they were really making it a big issue. But I looked at the gender pay gap in their organizations, and it was huge. And I looked at, and I asked them, who's cleaning your toilets? Are, the workers who do these kind of jobs protected? And they didn't have an answer for me. So I think, when you look at framework, it has to be holistic. We have to make sure that, you are considering things like gender pay gap, because if you don't have money and you don't have access to help, that makes you struggle more. If you are really struggling, and that's not just around treatment, but being able to make good choices for your health, being able to exercise regularly, being able to take care of yourself. Unfortunately, it takes money, and you need that support framework that is holistic. And work is a strong community, and it's a massive part of that. So, how are you protected? Are you earning the same? Are you able to say to your boss, honestly, I'm really struggling here and I need help and support? And the reasonable adjustments that need to come in place are there for you. So, for example, if you're having trouble sleeping and you've got insomnia, you're able to change your shift patterns to account for that. Or if you are going through a period where you're feeling really forgetful and you've got brain fog, you're able to kind of say that, and you're able to do it without shame or stigma or fear for your job. We had so many workers who were telling us that they made, one small error, and either they self-selected themselves to, kind of give up work because they didn't feel like they could do it anymore, even though when they received help, they were able to do their job perfectly well, or they were going through disciplinary procedures and they were having those kind of really difficult conversations where they were having to defend themselves against this kind of fear, of the menopause, because a lot of women going through the menopause didn't know what was actually going on with them. They were just feeling like, I know that I don't feel like my memory's great. I know that I don't feel energetic. I know that I'm struggling, but I don't really know why. And, they were kind of, menopause was in the back of their mind. But some people, for a lot of women, because of the lack of information out there, it was just really hard for them to kind of understand what they were going through. For a lot of people that we spoke to, the only place that they knew about the menopause was their own mothers. And in some families, it wasn't even talked about then. So we need to look at holistic support. We need to make sure that there are peer support groups there. We need to do the bread and butter stuff of having a policy as well in the workplace. But a policy can easily get quite dusty on a shelf. We need to make it a living document that people understand what their rights are at work. And there is no point in kind of knowing what your rights are if you can't access them. So you need to have that kind of support there. Otherwise, you'll see a generation of women who are leaving work and falling into pensioner poverty as well, because they've either left work because they have to, because they've gone through a disciplinary procedure, or because they've self-selected. So we need to see this as a long-term investment. And when you were saying about every pound that you were investing in women's health, I think that actually we can build upon that, because when you bring into pensioner poverty, I think the investment would be even bigger than you've said.
Oh, massively. There's so much great stuff there. I'm coming to you, Darren, in just a
That's
moment.
okay.
And I guess the whole thing is, businesses have to see it as their responsibility, which I don't think they currently do. They don't think it's their responsibility.
Yeah.
They seem to think nothing to do with us, or we've put a few things in place, off you pop. But the reality is, complex workspaces for people are so common. You might be driving a train, you might be flying a plane. You might be working on a factory line that's got GMP type quality environment, which means you can't step away from the line. You have to wear white uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
It's just all of these things, and I think the reality is that people need to roll their sleeves up and go and walk around the environments that constitute their businesses to actually see where are people struggling, because people really are struggling. And I suppose coming to you, Darren, because one of the pushbacks that we hear a lot is trade unions won't like it. Let's not talk about menopause. I have not experienced that actually. When given the chance, trade union people really don't want to know about the business case. They want to know how they can make it better for their members. And I suppose that the question is, how do we sell this? Because I think maybe we might need to sell it to, maybe if we've got some, our union representatives, I don't know how many are in the UK, probably between you probably know the answer to that, but, across
Tens
all
of
the
thousands.
tens of thousands, let's leave it at that, across are we getting to all of those tens of thousands so that they are educated to understand how do I best represent my member who might be experiencing any number of menstrual health challenges, might be in one of the stages of perimenopause? What can you say to those people, Darren, that might be going, well, I've heard there's a course on offer. I'm not really sure if I should go. Is it mandated as part of being a union rep, or do you think we should be actively saying to people, you need to sign up to something like this?
Yes. So at the moment, it's sort of like not mandated. It's very much sort of like encouraged. So certainly within Unison, we have encouraged all of our reps and actually our organisers as well, people like me, to actually go on women's health awareness, specifically, I guess, in terms of this conversation, menopause. But it sort of has always struck me that if we don't have a little bit of understanding and education ourselves as reps, it's going to be very difficult then to knock on the boss's door and say, can we have a meaningful conversation with you around this and around others? Because one of the things I'm absolutely passionate about, and people will have heard me say this before, is that a safer, kinder, more aware workplace for women is almost certainly a better place and safer workplace for men as well. And I think the challenges that I've found in going to lots of buildings and lots of factories and that sort of environments, or hospitals even, and others, is these are primarily buildings designed for the benefit of men, a little bit like how our health services are organised as well. But in terms of sort of like, in terms of our buildings, we have to sort of like ask a question, is this not just a safe place, but actually a place to get the most production and the most productive capacity out of your talents? Because I know that there's a demographic which is going to say, well, you should do this because it's the right thing, and that might be good for some people. Frankly, there are also the bean counters who need to understand, actually, is this going to make our business or our organisation more profitable or more productive, blah, 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 blah. And there's also then another issue, which I think has been talked about elsewhere, about the sheer number of women leaving the workplace every year for reasons of menopause symptoms. The Fawcett Society tells us it could be as high as 1 in 10. And I guess really there needs, and it's very much built into what Rhianydd then said in terms of then what happens to women who leave the workforce, and the impact on pension poverty. And we've got some statistics. There's not a huge amount, but we've got some statistics that if you look at the pay gap between men and women in work, by the time it gets to retirement age, it's almost like doubled for lots of different reasons, for which I'm not going to mansplain because Rhianydd is your expert. But it's just trying to get an understanding that, you know, supporting women at work through a natural stages of their life is an investment, not a cost. And it's actually when we have increasing choice on who we want to work for, we will go to those places which are going to be looking after me as the human being which I present in all of my diversity. I'm talking about generically, of course, sort of like into the workplace. And I just want to, just one last thing, if I can. When I look at health and safety statistics around why people don't come to work, they may be on sick leave, and you just Google it, and most organisations in the private and the public sector around the UK, it's normally around about 30 to 35% musculoskeletal, I think is the old phrase. When I did some research a couple of weeks ago around NHS Wales, where of course you have the demographic of 75% of the workforce is women, musculoskeletal doesn't even almost like exist, or it's almost like an outlier. It's around about 34 to 35% stress, mental health, and anxiety. Now, I'm not sort of like reading in between sort of anything, but the one thing that I'm having conversations about now is actually, what is that data telling us? Is it telling us that actually working in the NHS, especially through COVID, was stressful? 100%. But is there something that the data is telling us actually that this could be more to do with women's experience of work, and as we know, having to look after childcare, elder care, and all sorts of other things, and the kids leaving for university, all at the same time as they're at the height of their sort of their careers. So I'm not going to mansplain about that, but I'd be really interested to know, why are some organisations, and is it for reasons of demographics, that the statistics on why people are not in work for sick leave or having to leave work early are very, very different depending on different industries.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, I think I'm sure you both agree, there's so much more data we need to sort of tease out. And Rhianydd, you said is a data desert. I mean, some data we just hear like all the time, all the time, all the time. But actually, there are massive swathes of data that we're just not capturing. I mean, for me personally, I want to see much, much more data around ethnicity differences. You know, how is it someone like myself, less than 18 months after having my one and only child, I couldn't return to work? I mean, honestly, that's how powerful, we've got to get into that, because I think the margins, we can't just look at 45, to 55 anymore. We have to drop it back by another 10, in my personal opinion, which is we need to be looking at sickness data, absence data, lack of career progression from anyone from over 35. Or probably even a little bit lower, actually. So, I mean, why do you think, thank you, Darren, why do you think there is such a data desert, to use Rhianydd Williams, 2025? I'm going to quote you on that. Why is that the case, do you think?
Well, when we started this work, we did a literature review before, doing any work on it to see where there was data. I don't know why there was nothing out there, but there wasn't. There was absolutely nothing out there. The best place that we could find information was this morning's website. There was a workplace study that was done by Nottingham Trent, but there was no academic research, and I looked everywhere. It was really, really it was a data desert. And so we designed this survey that kickstarted the whole work that we did. And the response was incredible. It was like people were waiting for us to do this. And that felt really good, because every day I'd come in, I'd be like, 500 people have done this overnight, and we got to nearly 4,000 people completing the survey. And I think at the time of maybe some time after, that was the largest data set on the menopause, but it didn't feel like enough because it was still quite flat. You're reading people's experiences, and some people were pouring their heart out in the survey response, because we were the first person who had asked them about this. But I didn't felt like I got a rounded view of who they were. And so, Sarah and I decided that we would hold some focus groups, and we try and find, out from different people, what they were telling us in those surveys. And so we held focus groups with Black, Asian and ethnic minority women. We looked at reaching out to trans people and trying to experience, what they were going through. We looked at LGBT people, so lesbian and gay people as well, and members of the non-binary community. We looked at disabled women and their experiences, because I was also writing a toolkit on disability and hidden impairments at the same time as this toolkit. And those focus groups were really useful for both of those toolkits. And having that data really helped us to shape a campaign. There were still areas that we couldn't reach. We wanted to do some work on FGM, because we had a suspicion that, it created a barrier to access and help and support. So there's still lots of work that we'd love to do. We'd love to do work around climate change in the menopause, because we're the kind of impacts with water scarcity in the future, or heat sensitivity in the future. But understanding the lived experiences of women, and men, because we reached out to men's groups as well, around the menopause, and understanding those lived experiences, I think it really gave us a richer and fuller understanding, which informed the toolkit then. And I found those experiences of meeting people really enjoyable, because you really got to understand who they were and why they cared so much that, you know, this was something that we could work on. And it informed so much of the campaign. Like, we kept in touch with so many of them. And I remember one rep in a supermarket, which I won't name, and she was saying, "Oh yeah, you know, we were talking to the employer, and they're on board with this, and they said, oh, we're going to do something around the uniform, which was, you know, really kind of synthetic fibers, and they're going to make a uniform for menopausal women, which has natural fibers." And I said, "Hold on, just for menopausal women?" And they were like, "Yeah." I was like, "You might as well just paint them red and say, I'm on the menopause here, you know."
Yes.
We need to change things for everyone. And I think that's where the campaign really grew traction, because when you start realizing that actually the changes that you can make, you know, no one wants to go to work in a sweaty synthetic uniform. Everyone benefits from having breathable fabrics. Everyone benefits from being able to control their heat or their temperature, or being able to work when they feel more productive. You know, and when you start putting those kind of measures into collective bargaining, you know, negotiations, and saying, well, actually, we want a pay rise and we want improvements to our terms and conditions, we really started seeing, you know, a really big development in that campaign then, and it started flying. So, yeah, you know, those kind of people that gave their time and energy, they did more than just give us data. They built that whole campaign from the ground up, and I'm so grateful to them.
Oh, I love that. And like I said before we both came on, you know, June Potts and myself do a lot of research and reading, because, you know, my thinking is, why would you recreate the wheel? You know, there's already great iterations of that out there. But what we do is exactly that. We make it inclusive. So a rail provider that we've worked with, they actually had a stakeholder group from every level in the organisation, from the cleaning team. We had conductor managers, we had training staff, and we wrote what has become a beautiful document. I will send it to you both afterwards, but their guidance document is phenomenal. It's been written by the people for the people, with the intention of educating everybody. So everyone's represented in that. People going through fertility treatment who will be in and out of cycles of menopause. People who are going through cancer treatment will be in and out of it. Or those with early onset menopause. So we took people, you know, pardon the pun, but we really did, for a transport organisation, we really did take them on a journey. And it's something that they all feel very, very proud of. It's an inclusive, and you're right, both of you, it's the lived testimonies that really make us go, hang on a minute, we haven't covered that. You're like, we've missed that out. Well, you know, that's gone beneath the radar. And so I would like to add that into your ingredients list, if I might, which is that actually getting the people involved themselves, that's natural part of change making. You know, any change work that organizations need to do, you're going to get much, much better buy-in if you involve your people from the outset, because they feel that it's representative of them. So I suppose, I mean, obviously we've got so little time and so many more questions, but I guess if I were to ask you then, looking ahead for both of you, hopefully in this conversation, we've seen that, yes, menopause is a workplace justice issue. Those are Darren's words. He uses that so brilliantly all the time. Through your work, Rhianydd, you know, we are closing that data gap. And like you said before, you've still got so much research potentially available from your focus groups. You could probably take this in any direction you wanted to. And I'm sure menstrual health, and obviously men's health, you know, andropause, we know that affects up to 40% of men over the age of 45. You know, I really want to start having those conversations too. Hormone health in the workplace, full stop, I think is something that we could be much more inclusive about. But what do you think we need to do going forward? You know, what does progress look like when we think about businesses, trade unions, frameworks? What would you hope to see? I know it's a big ask, but what would you hope to see?
Well, for us, you know, Darren's already spoken about that Welsh way of working, the social partnership way of working, and that was a huge landmark piece of legislation for us in Wales, to have that agreement that, you know, government, businesses and trade unions work together collaboratively, and we're all in the same meetings, trying to preempt problems before they ever arise, so that we can consult with workers and say, well, this is a proposal. What do you think about this? You know, that was huge for us. And so progress has already been made along the way. For us, you know, where we're looking to go with this is looking at, you know, a kind of wider scope of women's health issues. So, you know, we're looking at the Employment Rights Bill, which now has an amendment around miscarriage, bereavement leave, so losing a baby before 24 weeks. I've also fed into the period dignity work that Welsh Government have been working on. And so bringing all of those things together, along with, you know, what are the tools? Because, you know, all of our toolkits, and I've written many of them now, they all follow a very similar format. We like to give a lot of information in the first section, and then in the second section, we give a very useful tools. So how do we do things? You know, how do we make change? And how do we get people in their own workplaces to feel empowered? I mean, I couldn't ask for a better advocate than Darren, because he's made it his life's work to go out into workplaces and do exactly what we were hoping would come of this campaign and make those changes. You know, and so what we want to do is kind of replicate what Darren does and get more people making those changes, because I can't sit here and be, you know, one person that does a nice piece of work if other people don't take it up. And I'm so pleased that, you know, I'm in a room of like-minded people who are there, you know, kind of working on this and building. And, you know, that's the way forward for us, kind of keep on finding the areas. Because, you know, there is so much that's coming down the line. We're seeing developments in AI and technology in the workplace. And we know that that impacts on women's health massively, because there's been, you know, a historic under research of women's health issues. And so the algorithm bias only extends that bias against women. And so, you know, how are we going to prepare for the future here? So we all have to be kind of there, ready to kind of look in every kind of dark space and shine a light on it. So, you know, for me, it's kind of keeping on having these conversations and working together, because that's how we've always worked as trade unions, by building, you know, a movement that we, you know, we bargain, we don't beg, we go to the employers, we have proposals, and we work collaboratively.
I love that. And I can't help but notice, I mean, I think that was almost like a round of applause moment, as like a manifesto. I don't know, it just strikes me you do stuff differently in Wales. Like, you're really passionate about stuff and you get stuff done. I just really feel that. It's like, what do we need to do in the rest of the United Kingdom to sort of replicate what Wales is doing? Like Molly Fenton, another lovely guest that we've had on the show, you know, just like really trailblazing. And I think,
Yeah.
and I do think when people come together, particularly in Wales, you get stuff done in a way that I think the rest of us need to sit up and pay attention. Like, you know, there's no sort of bashing, you know, on doors. You know, stuff just keeps happening in the Welsh Government, in outlying organisations. You know, I must say a big shout out to a Welsh organisation, Health and Her, who do a lot of amazing research. Kate Batch, you know, her organisation, they do a phenomenal amount. Yes, they're a business, but they also do a lot of research stuff in the background that people just have no idea about. Again, a Welsh company. So with that in mind, Darren, you know, let's imagine, this is a really big question to finish on, no pressure. Let's just imagine then, right, we don't necessarily have trade union reps, so we don't go, oh, well, it's okay. We haven't got trade unions telling us that we need to be doing this, and you're a small company. What is your hope then? Like, if you were to like roll up your sleeves and get in there, what do you want to say to those businesses that go, it's all right, it doesn't really apply to us? And they'll say it in that really dodgy type of accent as well, which is very non-Welsh. But you know, a bit called blind mate. You know, we don't need to worry about it. It's not coming for us just yet. It was interesting, but we don't actually need to do anything. What would you say to them?
Well, the one thing, I mean, there are many parallels between the toolkit and the British Standard. One of the key ones is that they are both free to download. So for some of those organisations who say, we don't work with trade unions, or, you know, all this EDI stuff and bloody blah, so in the too difficult pile, a significant amount of work is in this area is freely available for people to be able to look at checklists, look at why actually being menopause aware will actually help your bottom line and your business, whether you're a small to medium enterprise, whether a huge public sector department, or sort of like anything sort of like in between. And I've also been contacted, certainly during the British Standard time, of business owners who actually employed themselves. And I wouldn't say that they sort of like drew up a menopause policy for themselves, but they were able to draw on a lot of the work in the various toolkits, which look remarkably similar between the toolkits and the British Standard, because they are remarkably similar. And I guess the point is that you can be using these resources, which have been provided for, the Wales TUC represents for over 400,000 workers. They're the umbrella body for trade unions in Wales. And, you could make a case, if this was about the trade unions just wanted to be commercial themselves, that we put it behind a paywall or et cetera. These are all free to download with our love and encouragement, whether you are trade union supportive or not. And I think really what that also, I think, sort of like tells us is actually that trade unions can be SME and business friendly, because actually us sticking up for your staff should hopefully actually be what you do already if you're running your business sort of really well. So it's, I guess really this is why sometimes I've got different sorts of like arguments depending on whether I get a sense the person's the bean counter, the HR person, the generally nice person who just wants everybody to have a nice time at work, or sort of like or everything in between. But trade unions, I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? Because I'm gainfully employed by them. But in my 99.9% of the time, me and my colleagues are just going out to help people get on at work. There was a survey that the TUC did about 25 years ago, when my very old boss, nationally, who was General Secretary, Mr. Monks, and they did a survey at the time, and the survey of British people wanted to say, we want to get on, not just get even. And that's for us, that very much kickstarted our lifelong learning work within trade unions. But wanting to get on, not just get even, for me is a way that I've sort of worked my professional life, and supporting people going through natural stages in their life to stay in work and to prosper, and to be their very best, is helping people to get on. And it's only like if we have horrid employers who just don't care about their people and just their interest in the bottom line, that's then when people are forced to have the debate with themselves around getting even. But if we can do that partnership approach, which the UK government is now starting miraculously to start using the word partnership in lots of its communication, that's the sort of like the space we want to be. And if I could just leave you on this one last bit, sorry for the monologue. But when we'd concluded the British Standard, and of course we didn't want it left on a shelf, so there was folk like me going around lots of different employers. I went to the Federation of Small Businesses in Wales and others with colleagues in the British Standard. I just sent a simple email to our then Minister for Social Partnership, who was a wonderful woman called Hannah Blethyn, and just said, look, been involved in this. Is there any way that we can communicate it with like employers all across Wales and trade unions all across Wales? And literally 2 days later, officials said it's gone, it's been sent, and the link. And that was for private sector, public sector, voluntary sector organisations who are stakeholders on a tripartite agreement. And that's just the sense we get. It wasn't about lobbying, it wasn't about who pays who. It's just like, this is for the greater good. This will add value. Is that something that you can support? And of course, that came with the British Standard. That brilliant brand. But that's the sort of conversations that we can have, and it's good. It helps a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, we're pioneers in this because we have more women working than ever before. We also have more women working in later age than ever before. And so employers need to recognise that there's a duty of care that they have, but many people are, they don't need to be recognised that they do care about their workers, and they just need the kind of tools to know what their workers need. And workers will tell us quite clearly that this is what they need support with. I mean, you get those bad employers who put workers through hell, but you also get really great employers who will move mountains for their workers as well. And we want to get more of those because they're better for everyone. So that's where we're building towards.
Yeah, and it's lovely, and your language is so inclusive. It's lovely. I really love it. I feel very privileged to be in your company. I suppose, really, I mean, we're going to put how people can be in contact with you in the show notes. So I'm going to get that information from you. But if I were to summarize, like, this is no easy task, but if I were to summarize the episode and the conversation that we've had, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations going forward, that this episode is for everybody. Is the first thing I would say. It's not just for HR, it's not just for unions, it's for everybody. If you find yourself in a place of work, it's for you. This conversation is about caring about people so that they can thrive at work. It's about wanting to shift culture meaningfully. So if you believe in dignity and inclusion, you need a framework that works, and there are many out there. But I think we have to stand on, we stand on the shoulders of giants, really, because people like Rhianydd Williams, people like Kathleen Riach, who at the Glasgow Business School was talking about menopause 15 years ago. These are the people that we must remember who still are in this space, and so thank you very much for all the work that you've done and that you continue to do. What I would say is turn this podcast into a conversation in your teams, in your networks, with your leaders, because it's time to make menopause and menstrual health a shared workplace responsibility. For me, I'd like to end that I always want to think that work is a place where people thrive, they don't just survive. So I would like to say thank you so much for your time today. I'm so grateful. I'm hoping to have conversations with you both offline too, but we are stronger together, aren't we? And I think the noise, the volume is right up now. Unless you choose to be, to ignore it, you're going to need to do something. But thank you so much, Rhianydd Williams, Darren Dupre. Thanks for being part of Menopause Conversations.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.